For more, I'm joined by Caitlin Huey-Burns and Rebecca Kaplan. Caitlin is CBSN's political reporter, and Rebecca is a CBS News Capitol Hill producer. Welcome to you both. Caitlin, day one focused on the constitutionality of this impeachment trial. What were the arguments from former President Trump's attorneys on why they believe this impeachment should be dismissed?
Well, they argue that they believe this impeachment should be dismissed because they don't believe that a former president can be convicted. One of the president's attorneys said that essentially presidents are impeachable because they are removable, but former presidents are not. So they were trying to argue that because the punishment for conviction is removal from office, you can't remove a former president from office. They also argued, or tried to argue, that this would create kind of a slippery slope, that this kind of impeachment of a former president could lead to the impeachment of presidents or officials no longer in office. And they also argued that Trump is a private citizen, and this amounted to the legislative body making a trial of a private citizen. But the way in which these arguments started by Bruce Castor, the president's lead attorney, were very hazy and on shaky ground. And it was really unclear the argument that he was making originally. And that's important because he received a lot of negative reviews from Republican senators, even those who have been allies of the president, like Lindsey Graham and Ted Cruz. Notable among the group is Bill Cassidy, Republican from Louisiana, who after the arguments on the constitutionality today said that the arguments from the Trump team were disorganized. He was very upset with the ways in which they made or didn't really make an argument, didn't really get to their theory of the case. And he actually voted today, along with 5 other Republican senators, that this was a constitutional impeachment trial. And that's significant because just last month he voted against it. So that had an impact, at least, on changing one person's mind.
Yeah, that was interesting to see. Well, Caitlin, what was the counter argument from the House impeachment managers?
The key point from House impeachment managers today was that the president was already impeached while he was president. So they're trying to cut into this argument made by the defense team that you can't convict a former president. They're saying, look, the impeachment happened while Trump was still in office. And Jamie Raskin, who is the lead of these impeachment managers, was making the case that you can't have a January exception to the Constitution. In other words, that not having this level of accountability for a former president's actions while he was president amount to letting him get away with anything, amount to him getting away with things in the final days or weeks or even hours of his term. So this accountability argument was started today and will be a major theme that we hear this week as well.
Well, Rebecca, the House impeachment managers showed a graphic video of the events of January 6th, and it showed video from rioters alongside clips of former President Trump's speech that day. Why did the House managers decide to open up their arguments with that?
Well, Elaine, one of the key differences about this impeachment trial as opposed to the last impeachment trial of President Trump is that there's no obscure Ukrainian names. There's no figures in the government, either the U.S. or the Ukrainian government, that these people and the American people haven't heard of before. There is video, plain and simple, of this riot happening at the Capitol. And by interspersing that video along with the former president's speech from that day, it really allowed those managers to lay out a timeline. Yes, it wasn't necessarily the constitutional arguments that were the bulk of what we heard today, but it was the first opportunity they had to present not only to the Senate, but really to the American people live on TV. And they knew that this kind of video would really pack an emotional punch and remind everyone of this day, January 6th, just over a month ago. And what's so interesting in particular is that for many senators, they experienced this attack inside the Capitol and not actually watching it on TV like so many of us did. So instead of having seen a lot of these clips, and even for Americans who did see some of the video clips that were taken by rioters themselves that day, maybe you've seen 15 or 20 seconds at a time, not this full 13.5-minute video with all of these these clips that was played today, and it really did have an impact on people. One thing that Missouri Senator Roy Blunt told reporters after this opening day of the trial was that even he, who was actually conducting an investigation through the Senate Rules Committee, which he sits on, into the attack, he still hasn't even seen this much video from that day before, and it really reminded him how horrendous of a day it was. So that's not necessarily saying he's going to vote to convict the president at the end, but it certainly is going to help remind every senator sitting in that room of what they may not have seen in kind of full living color up until now, which is the full extent of that attack on the Capitol.
Right, because that's sort of the irony, right? As those senators and lawmakers were sheltering in the Capitol or in their offices, they didn't have the kind of situational awareness that they can now see in this video and in that presentation. Well, Caitlin, now that the arguments over constitutionality have ended, what can we expect to hear over the next few days?
Well, now we get into the opening arguments for both sides. So each side has up to 16 hours to present their case, and that's split over 2 days for each side, 8 hours per day. There is a question about whether both sides will use the entirety of that time. There's also a question of whether there will be witnesses called. The rules allow for impeachment managers to bring forward witnesses if they so choose, but we haven't heard yet if they plan on doing so. There will also be time, of course, after the end of the opening arguments for senators to ask questions, and will be given time to do so as well.
Well, Rebecca, yeah, we've learned that this trial is going to continue through the weekend, no days off. Why did the Senate make that decision?
Well, originally, interestingly, the second attorney who presented on behalf of Mr. Trump, David Schoen, had asked the Senate to not hold any working days on Saturday because he's an observant Jew who doesn't work on the Sabbath. So he asked that they skip those trial days. But interestingly, last night, just the day before this was going to start, he actually withdrew that request. He said he was concerned about any delays in the process and that his co-counsel would be able to handle any additional responsibilities on Saturday. He just won't be there himself. Now, what's interesting is you heard Caitlin mention before that the other attorney, Bruce Castor, received very negative reviews today, including from Republicans who are inclined to side with him on the case. So I do wonder if there's going to be any second thoughts about that decision, although I don't see it changing at this point. So the trial will keep going on Saturday and on Sunday to try to continue this. And the reality is a shorter trial actually benefits both sides here. For Republicans, I think they think the less time they spend dwelling on the former president's actions, the easier it is for them to move forward as a party. And for Democrats, they see there's a real necessity, they believe, to holding this impeachment trial and holding the former president accountable. But at the same time, the sooner they are finished with this trial, the sooner they can get back to work on some of their priorities with a new Democratic president in the White House. And of course, that principal one is the COVID relief package that the administration is working on.
And so, Rebecca, what is the time frame here? What are we looking at as far as the duration of this?
It's still up in the air primarily because of that question of witnesses that Caitlin mentioned earlier. Is the Senate going to try to call anyone to come speak? Former President Trump was invited to testify. He declined that offer. Just this morning, senior aides to the House impeachment team told me that they didn't have anything to share on whether they're going to try to subpoena the former president or whether they are going to call any other witnesses. And that's what's really has the potential to stretch this out. After both sides are finished with their arguments, there's a little bit of back and forth with members of the Senate when they can ask questions. And then if there are no witnesses that are called and no additional documents or anything that need to be submitted, they could potentially move to a vote. And again, both sides aren't necessarily going to use all 16 hours of that time. The House impeachment managers in particular stress that one of the things they've learned from having done this just a year ago with another impeachment trial is that they can make and they should make a succinct, non-repetitive case. So they very well may not use all of that time. So we could see this wrapping up in as little as a week, maybe even sooner if everyone kind of sticks to this tight schedule and there are no surprises ahead.
Well, Caitlin, President Biden was asked about the trial on Tuesday. Let's go ahead and play some of what he said.
Are you going to watch the trial?
I am not. Look, I told you before, I have a job. My job is to keep people. We've already lost over 450,000 people. We're going to lose a whole lot more if we don't act decisively and quickly. A lot of people, as I said, a lot of children are going to bed hungry. A lot of families are food insecure. They're in trouble. That's my job. The Senate has their job. They're about to begin it. I'm sure they're going to conduct themselves well, and that's all I'm going to have to say about impeachment.
So, Caitlin, President Biden has pretty much maintained that tone since the House voted to impeach Mr. Trump. Why is he keeping a distance from these proceedings?
That's right, a consistent message there from President Biden. The reason that he doesn't want to get involved or engaged in this process is because he wants to keep his eye on the ball, which is, as Rebecca mentioned, this COVID relief package, the issues at hand. Biden campaigned really as a referendum on former President Trump's handling of coronavirus, pledged to make a big difference here. And this relief bill, getting it through Congress and getting aid to people who need it is the big priority for this administration. They also want to focus on getting some of the remaining nominees to the cabinet confirmed, especially the Secretary of Education, given the priority of reopening schools. So that's been a consistent message from this president, and really a contrast to the former president, who was known to watch these things on TV, to watch a lot of TV. Jen Psaki, the White House press secretary, noted yesterday that Biden would not be watching much of the trial on television, if at all. There's also a political element of this as well. Weighing in for Biden and Kamala Harris as well would suggest or suggest some poor optics of weighing in and getting involved in a former rival, and it would look possibly political to be kind of engaged in this process, given that it involves Trump, who Biden ran against. So there's a political incentive, too, not to get involved here, as well as the practical one of just trying to keep eyes focused on the issues at hand.
All right, Caitlin Huey-Burns and Rebecca Kaplan, good to have you both. Thank you.